Light tanks, T-38, good for grinding armor assault XP. Amphibious capability is useful. Um, really lacks any ability to fight tanks. You want to upgrade, but you don't want to upgrade to this. This goes in D for dumpster fire. Um, it is. It has a 45mm cannon, and you unlock it early, but it is pitifully weak in a head-on fight, thanks to its low health and low armor, and its long reload time. It doesn't beat the Stuart or the Panzer II in a head-on fight, and it is the slowest of all the starter tanks by a fair margin. In fact, this might actually be the slowest tank in Heroes and Generals. Heavy tanks will leave this in the dust. It's basically running on pedal power. This is not viable and it's not fun to use. I cannot describe how rubbish this tank is. Like, really. It's, that's what D for dumpster fire is for. Moving on, the BT-7. What if you took the T-26 and its 45mm gun and not much health and not much armor, but instead of giving it the worst speed in the game, you gave it the best? This is the fastest tank in Heroes and Generals, just beating out the Hellcat. And that high mobility lets you use the same tools infinitely better. You can outmaneuver and outplay enemy tanks, you can avoid the guns on enemy heavy tanks. It's insane. It has a short respawn time, doesn't cost too much. This is a very, very good tank. I highly recommend it. It's probably the best Soviet light that you can get at the moment. The T-70 unlocks later, it costs more, it has a longer respawn time. You'd think it would be stronger, and in some cases it is. It has more armor, which makes it really resistant to guns with poor armor penetration, such as those on like the Panzer II for Germany, or the Lukes. So against those it's a lot better. But it's slower than the BT-7 and it has a longer respawn time, which means against heavier tanks and medium tanks and stuff, you're still going to get penetrated anyway. You don't really have much more health than the BT-7, you've just got more armor, which means you are doing better only against stuff that can't penetrate you with your slightly thicker armor. Um, and if you're against bigger tanks, you're better off just going for the full speed to try and avoid their guns. So T-70 is situationally really good, but the BT-7 is better overall in my opinion. The first medium tank you unlock is the T-28 here, and this goes straight to dumpster fire. That I heard this accurately described once as a steel coffin that fires ping pong balls, and I would just like to amend one slight incorrection there, because it's not actually a steel coffin, it's a wet toilet paper coffin. This thing is just, it's so fragile, it's so slow, its gun is useless. This is easily the worst medium tank in Heroes and Generals. Do not buy this, it's so bad. Right. Yeah, the only reason you would ever get this is to dick around with your friends, because it's kind of meme-worthy just how bad it is. Um, Moving on, the Su-76 was recently nerfed. I don't know why, because it wasn't very good to begin with, but this already had low mobility, low health, not great firepower, basically no armor, and then they went and took away its health and gave it even less. Um, so now this thing is basically made of paper, but it does have one really good virtue, which is it has the shortest respawn time in the game, tied with the T-38, which means you can use it with heavier vehicles and something like that I call respawn cycling. So, like, you play with a high respawn time vehicle, like an IS-2 or something, and then that dies and you have a really long respawn penalty. But tanks with a super short respawn time, you can spawn instantly. And the two shortest tanks you can get for respawn time are the T-38 and the Su-76. And let me tell you, the Su-76 is a lot stronger for fighting tanks. So in like capture and hold tanks or game modes like that, If you want a shorter respawn time tank to kind of like fill in those gaps between being able to spawn your powerful, heavier tanks, this is your boy. This is a really good support vehicle for you to pick up if you like to have high cost options in other slots. If you want to have a T-34-85 or an IS-2 or stuff like that, this is great to support them and to round out your roster. But overall, this is a pretty weak tank destroyer. Um, Next on our list is the T-34-76. This has the second best mobility of all medium tanks in the game, second only to the German Panther, and not by much. Yeah, great cross-country mobility, sloped armor that isn't that thick, but it's thick enough that you're pretty much impervious to light tanks, and it's got a lot more health than any of the kind of previous vehicles here. The 76mm gun is accurate-ish, pretty good muzzle velocity, and it with the APCR it can pierce about 90 millimeters of armor, which means you can take on any medium tank from the front, including the Panther and the EZ-8, while having a much shorter respawn time, lower cost. And then from the side, you can generally damage most heavy tanks. You can take on a Tiger 1 or a Jumbo Sherman to the side with this 3-inch gun with the APCR. So this is one of the most well-rounded, excellent tanks in the game. Uh, it, you'll get bodied by German heavy tanks in a head-on fight, but that's just the reality. Most tanks get bodied by German heavies in a head-on fight. This is one of my most highly recommended purchases to any Soviet tanker. It does have a big brother, the T-34-85, but I think that tank is actually a lot worse. It has a much longer respawn time, much higher cost, much harder to unlock, and I would argue that this tank is actually usually not as good. So there's two main factors that are worse than the T-34-85, although they are mostly the same tank. This one has a much longer respawn time, so you are forced to be much more conservative, and you will probably want to equip another tank that has a shorter respawn time, like an Su-76. Um, and the other thing about this is it's got a really big gun breach. You know, it has a bigger gun, um, but and the bigger gun does make a difference. It gives you a fair bit of extra damage and penetration. But it's so easy to disable. You will get your gun breach shot out all the time with the T-34-85. So you are gonna grow to hate this tank if you ever buy it. Everyone who I've spoken to who owns this tank despises it and regrets buying it. It is the worst Tier 3 medium tank, especially when it is coupled with arguably the best Tier 2 medium tank. So this is no, it's situationally good, specifically in war, when your tank spawns may be really limited, and you may be up against heavier tank classes. And if you have to take on Tiger 2s using only like 3 medium tank spawns or something in a war game, then in that specific situation, the T-34-85 has a bit more armor penetration, a bit more range damage, so you may be able to get a bit more performance there. So if you're really collect everything kind of guy, then I guess you can pick this up for those occasional war games where you need max value. But overall, just spawning several T-34-76s is just so much better than spawning one T-34-85. Yeah, it's only in really, really hard battles of attrition when this is ever better. Moving on. The KV-85 is basically the same as a T-34-85 that spawns in the heavy tank slot and gets a bit more health. It is harder to gun breach, I believe. Had this reported. I see so few of them in game that it's very rare for me to get the chance to shoot at them. But from my friends who've used it, it seems to not have too many troubles with that. It is the fastest heavy tank, as I understand, but it's also probably the weakest in a head-on fight. You will expect to lose to a Tiger 1 and a Jumbo Pershing in this. It's decent to pick up for capture and hold tanks, and it's not a terrible investment overall, just seeing as the other Russian heavy tank is not any good either. Um, but it just lacks the this it its description says it's comparable to the Tiger 1, but I mean, if by comparable you mean strictly worse in pretty much every way, then I guess it's quote unquote comparable. The 85mm gun is much it's an underperformer compared to even the short-barreled 88mm on the Tiger 1, and it doesn't get double zoom. Um, it has lower muzzle velocity, worse anti-armor performance, and as an extra bonus, the KV-85, as well as having less armor, it's got this big fuel tank in the front. The IS-2 has this problem as well, but you take one shot to the front hull, and it just does a massive amount of damage to you, like half your health in one hit, just from shooting this one friggin' fuel tank. So it's a real danger, that one. It's not recommended in a heavy tank v heavy tank fight, but it's pretty nice to use, and it handles really well against everything other than heavy tanks. So for that reason, it still makes it to B tier. Um, and C tier, we have the IS-2. This, don't get me wrong, this is more powerful than any of the other tanks listed so far, but it's not more powerful than the other tier 2 heavy tanks, and you're paying the same friggin' price and the same respawn time for what is just not even a shadow of a King Tiger, and it's not even as good as a Pershing. Never mind the King Tiger. This thing is the only tier 2 heavy tank to not get double zoom. It has a pitifully small ammo supply of only like 26, 28 rounds, something. Um, it has a really low muzzle velocity, despite its seemingly big gun. Um, its armor penetration is poor, and the APCR for this it's basically like a friggin' this thing's ping pong balls, the T28. It's such a slow muzzle velocity. It's impossible to hit moving targets or really anything at long range. It's just bad. Every now and then you get one lunatic on the forums who insists that this is like the best tank in HNG, and if you give it Iron Fist Gold and fast reload, or what's it called, Gunner Gold, then you can out DPS a King Tiger in exactly this set of circumstances if you perform a pentagram to summon the RNG gods from the underworld of HNG. It's bullshit. This tank is just worse. And if you took the same bloody principles that you apply to the IS-2 to a tank that didn't suck in the first place, you'd be having far greater success. Like, really. It's just people are so incredibly like ignorant of that what they themselves are saying is like, yo, when you have the Iron Fist Gold and Gunner Gold, it becomes so much better. And I'm like, yeah, but so does the King Tiger. you you can put the same badges onto a better tank. Not for this faction, though. Soviet Union just gets shafted with their heavy tanks overall. Like, neither of these are good. They're just... The KV-85 is nicer to use, so for that reason I edge it up a little bit, and it's also cheaper, so it's more accessible to new players if you just want a step up for capture and hold tanks. That's what this is useful for. And if you want to actually take on German heavy tanks in the front, this is what you want. Your Su-100. And I should probably rate the Su-85 as well, which I seem to have left behind. This is probably actually my most used tank in the last year or so. This is a high damage, like both of them basically fill the same role. Um, one of them is just slightly bigger and has a longer respawn time. And they are for taking on heavy tanks in direct combat. You want to aim for the turret, disable the gun breech, disable the gun barrel, um, and once their firepower is down, you can just thump them at long range over and over again until they eventually die. Um, They have no machine guns on board for either of them, so especially until you get high explosive, you're really vulnerable to infantry. But overall, these are just so effective for killing enemy tanks in like a respawn and credit economic way. You are going to trade really well versus enemy heavy tanks. I've got heaps of videos on this channel of me and my friends taking on bloody king tigers and shit in Pershings, just tank using this medium tank destroyer. And the SU-100 is like a beefed up version that you can respawn cycle between these two without any spawn delays. So you can spawn an SU-100 and an SU-85 and alternate between them. And you'll never have to wait in a respawn queue as long as you don't die too quickly with any of them. SU-100 gets double zoom and is the only non-German vehicle to be able to penetrate the King Tiger's front glacis on the first shot. So it gets really important distinction there. This is the best Soviet vehicle that you can get for capture and hold tanks. And this one is probably the most economic one that you'll get in the medium to early game, and has the low credit cost, the low respawn cost, the good mobility. This is built on the T-34 chassis, by the way, so you get the same great mobility married to the T-34-85's gun without the gun breach problem. And yeah, overall, these two are really excellent tanks. I don't pretend that this is like as good as a Jagdpanther. Like, this is basically strictly worse than a Jagdpanther. But you're playing Soviet Union, and you've got to work with what you got. And the Soviet Union tanks are overall the weakest in the game. But SU-100, SU-85, BT-7, and the T-34-76 are my most highly recommended tanks for most players to pick up, at least for that first tanker. Like, you're looking at your first tanker, and he's only got 4 slots available to equip stuff in. These are the 4 that you want to fill those slots with. And maybe you can start a second tanker someday in the distant future if you've got 1,000 hours to burn on this game and get a T-70 and an IS-2 or whatever. But yeah, these are the top picks. So thank you all for watching, and if you liked this sort of tier list commentary sort of video, make sure you say so in the comments. Leave a like, leave a subscribe if you want to see more. And if you disagreed with anything I had to say, go ahead, head to the comments, and tell me what your thoughts were. If you've got more conspiracy theories about the IS-2, let us hear them. Yeah, I'll see everybody later.